At 2 o'clock in the morning, the land was discovered at 2 leagues distance. They took in sail and remained under the square sail line till day, which was Friday, when they found themselves near a small island, one of the Lacayos, called in the Indian language Guanahani.
These were the words of Christopher Columbus detailing the first sighting of the island of Guanahani in the Americas on his first voyage to find a direct route to Asia. On this island, Columbus and his crew became some of the first Europeans to encounter Native Americans in the entirety of world history. Columbus and his men encountered the Lacayan people, a Taino people native to the Caribbean on Guanahani, and it is here on this island where the course of history would be changed forever. Contact with the Lacayan, although cordial at first, ended in abject misery for them and the surrounding tribes, as many were exploited for what little gold they had and put into slavery. As exploitation of the Lacayan continued, and the Viceroy of New Spain was formed, the Lacayan, along with many other indigenous Caribbean tribes, were soon extinct. This, of course, opened the door up to the continued colonization of the Americas from European colonial powers and the exploitation and extinction of many other tribes and people groups. Although exploitation of people groups on this scale does not happen today, the seeds of this mentality still exists in the form of the exploitation of uncontacted peoples. But what are uncontacted peoples? Uncontacted peoples are defined as communities of indigenous peoples living without sustained contact with their immediate neighbors and the world community. Current research shows that there are around 100 different uncontacted people groups concentrated primarily around South America, Central Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and Oceania, with more than half of them being located in the Amazon rainforest. Uncontacted peoples are typically found in thick forested areas that have allowed them to live in anonymity and remain isolated. However, most of these peoples groups probably would have had minimal contact with outsiders or neighboring communities, either through anthropological study or other means. The idea of contacting these tribal groups has garnered much controversy, as contact with these groups interferes with their right to self-determination. Likewise, many tribes may lack the immunities to common diseases that the contactors may unintentionally expose these tribes to. This has the potential to wipe out an entire tribe. The question of whether these people should be contacted or left alone is very controversial, to say the least. And as a result of this, a bit of fascination for these people have grown both in academia and with the general public. Organizations such as Survival International, a human rights organization that specializes in indigenous rights, condemns such contact, citing a plethora of possible consequences. These groups cite problems associated with interference of their right to self-determination, noting that contact could possibly expose them to diseases to which they do not have the immunity for, and leads them to be fetishized and objectified, often in dehumanizing ways. These are all problems that the modern archaeological community has to face, as it raises some serious ethical questions. These issues, however, are ongoing and perhaps most prevalent in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands are an archipelago located in the Bay of Bengal and are administered by the government of India as a union territory. And although only recently administered by India, contact between the two stretches back centuries, when the Chola Empire, located in modern-day southern India, took over the islands from 1014 to 1042 AD. The islands were then taken over by the British Empire, along with the rest of India in the 1700s, then had a short occupation by the Japanese in World War II, and were eventually given to the modern Republic of India following their independence in 1947. These islands since then have experienced much migration from mainland India and surrounding countries. The islands are made up of 6 indigenous ethnic groups: the Great Andamanese, which is made up of 10 different subgroups, the Jarawa, the Sentinelese, the Onge, the Shompen, which are exclusively located on Nicobar Island, and the Jango, which became extinct by the 1920s from diseases introduced through contact. Additionally, there are also a number of immigrant groups on the island too, of which include mainland Indians and the Bamar people from Burma. Overall, immigrant groups outnumber indigenous ethnic groups in terms of population. This fascination with tribes has sparked the monetization of tribes on the island, specifically with the Jarawa. The Jarawa, despite having sustained contact with outsiders, still maintain a hunter-gatherer nomadic lifestyle. This lifestyle has captured the interests of many people to the point that companies have formed to essentially offer tour groups to view these people from up close. These people viewing the tribes aren't anthropologists who wish to study the tribe from a distance, though. They're tribal tourists, eager to see these people firsthand by essentially treating them like animals, observing them from a tour bus in a similar fashion to a zoo safari. And although outlawed by Indian law, these tour groups are often seen being supported by local law enforcement on the island. It's not uncommon that law enforcement will look the other way due to the economic benefits the tour groups bring to the islands. And of course, this has sparked much controversy, as the tour groups aren't just a threat to the natives, but to the environment to which they occupy. The tour takes tourists on the Great Andaman Trunk Road, which is a road that goes straight through the reservation. The tribe is typically observed on the right side of the road as the tour bus travels down the road, and they're described as only wearing loincloths and carrying tools. The tour prohibits any video or photography of these groups, although this rule is often overlooked. The appeal of this tour is to essentially see an uncontacted, primitive group of people, which not only dehumanizes these people by essentially treating them like zoo animals, but it compels us to reconsider our fascination with these tribes in the first place. These tourists have been reported to have been throwing food at the natives to feed them and encouraging the natives to dance for entertainment. Sophie Grigg, a correspondent for Survival International, likens these tour groups to a tour observing you through your backyard. She stated this in an interview with Vice News. The highway, although opposed by indigenous rights groups before its construction in the 1970s, could also be expanded in the future. Furthermore, due to the influx of tourists, the islands have also been struggling with waste management, which affects the tribes and surrounding ecosystem. This extended contact with outsiders has also exposed the Jarawa to diseases to which they might not have immunities to. They have suffered outbreaks of measles in 1999 and again in 2006, although no deaths were reported. The Jarawa are not the only tribe in danger, unfortunately. The Sentinelese are another isolated tribal group in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, estimated to have been living in isolation for over 50,000 years. Located on North Sentinel Island, an island that makes up the Andaman and Nicobar archipelago, the Sentinelese are isolated in language, genetics, and culture. Very little contact has actually been initiated with these people, mostly due to their hostility to the rest of the world. However, attempts of contact have been made. These attempts, however, have almost always resulted in hostility towards the curious travelers, with some even resulting in the injury or even death of the contactors. Due to these confrontations, the Indian government has banned all travel to the island, and it is now guarded by their naval forces to deter any other possible hostile confrontations with the tribe. These successful contacts were made by Indian anthropologist Madhumala C. in 1991 and later in 1999. She had worked for the Anthropological Survey of India. These contacts were allegedly seen as being successful, with their encounter being largely restricted to only observing them from afar. A later expedition allowed them to actually meet the tribe, as they greeted Madhumala and her team without weapons. The confrontation, however, ended when a misunderstanding led to one of them whipping out a knife and gesturing them to leave. This all serves the point that the Sentinelese probably don't want to be contacted. Madhumala concludes that the tribes of the islands do not need outsiders to protect them. What they need is to be left alone. Despite these successful contact attempts, no accurate data of their population exists due to the tribe's isolation. Estimates of their population range from as low as 50 to as high as 200 people. They speak the Sentinelese language, although it is still unsure what language family it belongs to. Some contact attempts, however, could be proven to be fatal to the Sentinelese, as with the case of John Allen Chow. Occurring in November of 2018, John Allen Chow, an American Christian missionary, set out to visit the Sentinelese in hopes of preaching Christianity to them. Chow had described North Sentinel Island as Satan's last stronghold on Earth. Chow had entered the islands illegally by paying local fishermen to take him to the islands. They avoided the Indian Coast Guard by traveling to the island at night. Chow made several trips to the island. All were unsuccessful. He tried to initiate contact by luring them with gifts or singing Christian hymns, but to no avail. Chow's final visit was on November 16th of 2018, when he had instructed the fishermen to leave without him as he ventured into the island alone. The following day, the fishermen had reported seeing Chow's dead body being dragged by the natives to be left on the beach shore, and the fishermen were subsequently arrested by the Indian government. Many human rights organizations, including Survival International, have criticized Chow's visit to the island, citing the possibility that he could have unintentionally exposed the natives to various illnesses to which they have no immunity to. This exposure has the potential to wipe out the entire tribe. Also, since Chow's goal of contact was to convert them to Christianity, Survival International, along with many other indigenous rights groups, have also accused Chow of interfering with the right to self-determination. Chow's body is still yet to be recovered. Too often, encounters with uncontacted tribes are more interesting for what it tells us about ourselves rather than what it tells us about the tribe itself. Ever since the dawn of time, humans have always had the need to exploit other humans. Exploitation, eradication, or downright genocide has always been prevalent in the pages of our history. Our barbaric tendencies are still here and have evolved to a smaller scale. They are never more prevalent than with the barbaric exploitation of these uncontacted people groups, similar to how it was in the past. These are all issues that the world, and the anthropological community in particular, has to face in the future. These tendencies should compel us to reconsider our preconceived fascination with uncontacted tribes and the damage it has on them. Perhaps this barbaric tendency of exploitation has never died. It has just evolved over time.
Come from each other's eyes as they would start to